Thank you, Miriam. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Pope. I'm a Natick resident. I'm a mom. Um, I am super excited to be here and to have all of you here, and very privileged and honored to be an advisor to the R.I.S.E Youth Led Coalition. Tonight, we are going to speak with our school committee candidates on the topic of anti racism. We anticipate having an excellent, comprehensive conversation that we hope gives you all more brevity and more insight to where your candidates stand, where anti racism is concerned. So we look forward to it, and I'm going to now pass it to Bianca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca D'Antonio. I graduated Natick High in 2017, and I'm currently a senior at Emerson College. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about RISE Natick. So RISE itself is an acronym which stands for Racial Justice, Inclusivity, Social Justice, and Equity. And we are a youth-led coalition that recognizes racism, and it's committed to engaging in anti-racist work that combats systems of oppression. And we do so by partnering with organizations and community members in Natick through means such as this panel tonight, in order to grow an inclusive, equitable, and proactive community in which everyone can thrive. And I will pop it over to Connor to introduce himself.
Thanks, Bianca. Hi, everyone. My name is Connor Shea. I am a former NPS student. I graduated in 2016. And I will pop it on over to Miriam.
Hi everyone, I'm Miriam. I'm a current NPS student. I'm a junior at Natick High right now, and I will turn it over to Dhruba.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Dhruba Sen. I'm an anti-racist activist practicing the servant leadership model, which is basically bringing leaders and prospective leaders together in the domain of anti-racism. And I am very privileged to be another advisor to this group, R.I.S.E. Thank you very much. And I pop it back to Miriam.
Thanks, Dhruba. So today we have our 3 school committee candidates joining us. We have Matt Brand, Shai Fuchsman, and Catherine Brunel. So just to quickly review the format of the panel, we will give each candidate 2 minutes to give an opening statement at the beginning of the panel. Then we will move on to our questions, and each question we will ask to every candidate. Every candidate gets the same questions, and we'll get the same amount of time to answer each question. And we'll also be rotating the order to make sure that this process is fair for everyone. And then at the end of our pre-selected questions, we will give each candidate 1 minute closing statements. And I also just want to note that the candidates have not been given a chance to see the questions up until tonight. So that being said, we can get started with our opening statements if all our candidates are ready. Great, so we're going to begin with Matt. Matt, you have 2 minutes. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for being here, particularly to RISE Natick for organizing this. Is a really important topic, and I look forward to hearing what the questions are and discussing it with everybody. I am seeking re-election to the school committee. I just am at the end of 3 years, at the end of my first term. When I ran 3 years ago, I ran with the understanding that if elected, I would need to learn a ton. It's a big job. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of listening. And when I was elected, it became clear pretty quickly when the first task was to hire a new superintendent that we had a lot of work to do. The last 3 years have been very challenging. We've had difficult budget issues to deal with. We hired Dr. Nolan as a superintendent, which I'm very proud of. And certainly in the past year, we've dealt with COVID-19. I am not going to talk during right now about anti-racism because I will save all that, I'm sure, for all the questions. But I will say at a high level, one of the things that's most important to me and something that I model for my daughters, I have 2 daughters who are 6th and 7th graders at Kennedy. One of the things that's most important to me is to model good citizenry, to be a good person, to accept everybody for who they are, to make sure that all students, all members of our community, it extends far beyond just the people who attend school, all people can achieve at their highest level, can feel welcome and safe. And so I look forward to our discussion tonight, where I'm sure we'll cover lots of really interesting topics. And I thank, again, R.I.S.E for organizing this, the other candidates for being here, members of the public for tuning in. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Matt. Next, Catherine, whenever you're ready, you have 2 minutes.
Forgot that I could unmute myself. Thank you so much for having me and for having this discussion. I think it's a rather brave thing for a new group to do, and that you've established yourself as an anti-racist group in Natick. Yeah, I'm really just struck by the profound courage that this group has. And I know it's a conversation that as a district, people have been asking for a while. And even in our strategic plan, we have goal areas around equity and diversity and inclusion. And so it's ways that we want to grow in Natick. And yet they're hard conversations to have. And they're going to require a lot of community effort, and it's going to require a lot of listening. So I think that actually even having this forum tonight, I think it's one of the first of its kind, if not the first of its kind, where candidates can discuss these specific ideas about anti-racism and diversity and equity and inclusion. I think it really speaks volumes to where Natick wants to go and where we could go. Now, that matters. That depends on if we are ready to implement change. And I think when I think about anti-racism, it is first acknowledging and then moving towards the change that we can acknowledge. And in the school committee, there's a lot of levers that we can use in terms of budget and policy to actually enact and impact in measurable ways these kinds of topics. And those levers are actually why I'm running for the school committee, because I want to be someone who is impactful in our community and that can listen and can then translate what I'm hearing into the change we want to see. So thank you for having me tonight, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Catherine. Shai, feel free to go whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. So first of all, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, and especially to the participants and the advisors of R.I.S.E for putting together this important forum. My name is Shai Fuchsman. I'm a candidate for school committee re-election. As a candidate, I have made racial justice a priority in my campaign. In fact, it's in my little postcard in my website. And tonight I want to tell you why. Like many Americans, I was deeply disturbed and angered by the murder of George Floyd this past summer. And upon reflections about these emotions, I realized that I had been there before, when the victim was Tamir Rice, and when it was Eric Gardner, and when it was Philando Castile, and so many countless others. But as a white guy, I have the privilege of contending with these emotions for a couple of days before moving on to the next issue that preoccupies me. And so this summer, as I was reflecting on this, I decided I was going to make racial justice a priority for myself, even when it's no longer part of the headlines. And so I made a commitment to myself to promote racial justice in my personal life as a parent, in my professional life as an educator, and as a school committee member. And I bring to this conversation 3 important values. First of all, humility, because there's so much more that I need to learn and reflect on. Number 2 is vulnerability. We white folk oftentimes don't want to talk about racism because we're scared to say the wrong thing. Well, I need to take that risk in order to talk about racism and to address racism. And third is praxis, the idea of turning ideas into action, especially on school committee. And these are the values that I've already brought into the school committee as a member for the past 1.5 years in my advocacy for equity and inclusion for all students. And I will continue, if reelected, to advocate for these issues, because I deeply believe that every Natick student should have the supports and services they need to be successful, regardless of who they are. and because I think it's important that we educate all of our students about making positive change in order to social justice. In fact, some of you R.I.S.E students and alumni are part of the inspiration of why I'm running for school committee tonight. So with that, I look forward to our conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai.
Thank you, Shai. So our first question will be going out to Catherine first. So Catherine, in 1 minute, explain what a school committee member does.
Thank you for that question. So I've done a lot of research on this because I like to understand what a school committee does from a policy level, from a budget level. I've reached out to former school committee members. I've talked to the former superintendent, Dr. Joe Keefe. I've talked to school committee members across the country, actually, just to understand not only based on like what it says in the books, but also what happens in real practice. And so the way I can boil it down is that a school committee member is somebody who listens to the community, in addition to understanding the needs and the direction that the administration would like to take the schools. And then that school committee member becomes the bridge of those two things. So can we reflect back the community's priorities and then direct the superintendent in terms of budget and policy and hiring practices?
Thank you, Catherine. We'll be asking Shai next. In 1 minute, explain what a school committee member does.
So as any elected official, our job is to represent the voices and the priorities and the values of the community. Specifically for school committee, we bring those priorities into 3 specific areas, which are overseeing the budget, supervising hiring and firing, if needed, the superintendent, and third, setting both policy and goals for the district. And these are our levers to insert our priorities and values as a community. I see my responsibility as a school committee member, number 1, making sure that we help our students achieve the best outcomes they can, both academic and social emotional skills. So for example, those, I have here you can't see the portrait of a graduate, those important skills of critical thinking. That's one of the big priorities, is those student outcomes. And number 2 is we also have a fiduciary responsibility to our entire community to make sure that we're investing our resources properly and in line with our priorities and values as a community.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Matt, in 1 minute, explain what a school committee member does.
Thank you. When I was elected as a school committee member, it was to represent the views of the committee, of the community. And as a school committee member, it is my job to collect data from a variety of sources via conversations with the community, via research, other boards and committees in town, from as many people as possible, and then I was elected because of my ability to form my own opinions, draw my own conclusions, and work with the district leadership and other town partners in order to best support the success of all of our learners and all of our staff in the town, while recognizing that we live in a community that has other services. So it's not just about the schools. So we have to have a worldview and look objectively at everything that happens in town and represent the entire community.
Thank you, Matt. So our next question will be going to Shai first. Shai, in 1 minute, how do you define anti-racism?
Well, so I think that this country, as a society, we've had a difficult relationship with racism, a relationship that is both deep and long historically, and still continues to impact, especially Black and Brown people and our students, Black and Brown students in our community. The difference is between being, when it comes to racism, you're either the victim or you're the you benefit from it. You're privileged, even if you don't want to as a white person, you benefit from racism. So anti-racism is about the active role that we take. It's about taking an active role to address those forces of oppression that have been part of our community for a long time, those structural racist structures that impact many members of our community. I think that today we understand that there's really only 2 actions we can take. We can either be passive and continue to benefit from racism, or we can take an active role in addressing racism. And that's what anti-racism is about.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Matt, in 1 minute, how do you define anti-racism?
Anti-racism to me is the part that I play with whomever it is that I can influence to make the world better for everybody. So whether it's with my daughters or my family or my friends or as a representative on the school committee, it's not enough to acknowledge that there are racist people or there are racist acts or anti-Semitic acts. It's not enough to just acknowledge it. I have to ask myself every morning, what can I learn today? What can I do today to make my world better for everybody around me? So the actions that I take to improve my environment and those in the environment of those around me is how I would define anti-racism.
Thank you, Matt. Next, Catherine, in 1 minute, how do you define anti-racism?
Thank you. So as the other two candidates have said, I agree about the idea of acknowledging, right? For me, that's the first step in anti-racism, is acknowledging that racism exists not only in our culture, but it exists in me. I have implicit biases, and that in that acknowledging, then we have to be able to have the courage to then think about how we can change, how we can challenge, and how we can change things. Anti-racism to me and the school committee particularly means asking questions for disaggregated data. I'd like to know, things about our students that are non-white, going back to backing all of our decisions with data, so that as we acknowledge that data, then we can work to challenge it and change it. For example, how many of our students that are non-white, I'll just give you one quick example. How many of our non-white students participate in after-school activities, and what are those activities? That's an important question I would be asking.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. So next, we will be asking Matt first. And from here on out, I want to clarify you have 2 minutes to answer each question, and that will not be changing. So Matt, what do adequate anti-racist training programs look like to you, and how would you make sure that the school committee includes enough resources in its annual budget to follow through with these programs?
Thank you. It's a good question. I'm not sure at the highest level that in the near term it will ever be adequate. I think there's always more that we can do. We have a variety of ways that we can provide as a school committee services and support to increase our anti-racism efforts in the district. So we have things now, there's money in the budget that goes towards training and curriculum work and more diverse and inclusive activities. But we also do a lot of work to get grants. So for instance, the entire administrative team in town participates in the Harvard R.I.S.E diversity integration training, but that's funded by grants and we were nominated by Metco because we're a participating community in Metco. So that's not actually something that comes from the budget. So I think we actually have to look beyond the budget. We have priorities all over the place that have to do with important things for all of our students, but we get money from a variety of sources to provide as much as we can in terms of anti-racism programs. So like, for instance, there is the Influence 100 program, which has, it's designed, it's new, 2019, it was designed to support and promote future superintendents of color. In Massachusetts, there are roughly 4% of the superintendents who are people of color. Right, we have 2 people from Natick who are participating in this Influence 100 program, and they've been doing it since 2019 during professional development days. So the half days, the early releases that we have, like we had one this week, they are presenting on the things that they learn there. So to wrap up, I think we have budget work that we can do, we have grant work that we can do, and we have to constantly be looking to add more programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Next, Catherine, what do adequate anti-racist training programs look like to you, and how would you make sure that the school committee includes enough resources in its annual budget to follow through with these programs?
Thank you for the question. And if I may, I think that our whole budget does include the grants. I think that we have a town appropriation budget, and then we have our entire school budget that does include the grants. And so I think it's important for us to always notice, out of the entire budget, what is the percentage that we are then giving, or what are the dollars that we are giving? Can we clearly identify those dollars? I've had a hard time doing that, going through the budget and looking for things that are particularly tied to our equity initiatives. There's one number that I did find in our professional development budget, where from our town appropriation, we have a $500,000 about $500,000 professional development budget. In the coming year, we have a $9,000 that is attributed or earmarked to go towards microaggression training. And for anyone that knows about professional development, you know professional development is expensive. So to bring microaggression training to our staff of over 1,000 people, that means probably about one speaker is going to be able to come to Natick next year with our professional development budget as it's currently written. That's not adequate in my mind, especially if I look on the goal areas and equity is absolutely a focus. I think we need to be able to tie more of the dollars directly towards practices. Because again, obviously this is about belonging. This is about students feeling safe. This is about teachers feeling like they want to stay here. Teachers of color in particular, that they want to stay here and they want to grow their careers here. In order to do that, we need to actually put money where our mouth is, or use our budget as our moral policy document. We've had talk about a diversity, equity, and inclusion director, and it wouldn't be enough just to hire that person. We'd need to be sure that they themselves had a budget for that type of development.
Thank you, Catherine. Next to Shai. What do adequate anti-racist training programs look like to you, and how would you make sure that the school committee includes enough resources in its annual budget to follow through with these programs?
Well, so let me separate this question into two parts. First of all, is what is adequate training? So what is it that we want every single adult in our building, in each one of our buildings, to know? And how do we train them in order to create a more just and more equitable school environment? First of all, I think it's important that we train on implicit bias. If you have what I always heard about implicit bias, if you have a brain, you have a bias. We all have biases. We need to explore them. We need to understand them, and we need to figure out how to mitigate our biases. We need to make sure our teachers are thinking about that. We all need to make sure we know about that, by the way, including our teachers. It's also important to think about equity. What does it mean? What does equity mean? And what does equitable education mean for our teachers? There's a whole field, research-based field on culturally responsive instructional practices that people in even in our community, Melissa Patrick is an expert on these issues. We need to make sure we're training our teachers on what is a research-based, evidence-based, culturally responsive instruction, and what are culturally responsive systems, school systems, so that as a system, not our leaders are also thinking about creating equitable and culturally responsive environments. And then we teaching our students social justice, and how do we train our teachers to promote social justice? That's what's adequate training and beyond. And again, it's about bringing humility and being open to understanding what is it that we need to do more of. In terms of the budget, so let me just disagree respectfully with Catherine Brunel. We have a very big professional development budget. The $10,000 she's talking about is actually an additional funding that was added this year, specifically earmarked towards training. However, we've already had, as part of our the base professional development, we already had people like Melissa Patrick and Kelsey Warnham, who's a well-known trainer, training all of our staff this year on implicit bias and racial justice, issues of racial cultural responsiveness. So we've added those $10,000 in order to do more of that work. Continue to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. So our next question will go to Catherine first. So Catherine, what policies would you implement to attract faculty and staff of color to Natick Public Schools and to retain those staff members?
Thank you for the question. So as I said in my last answer, I think this really is about belonging and people feeling safe, people feeling as if they have a voice and that there's not going to be tokenism in Natick, that there is going to be a place here for them as an educator and as a professional and as somebody who is of color, so that we're going to respect the diversity and important life experience that they bring, but that we're also going to hold them up as a professional because of the excellent education that they bring. So how do we do that with policy? I think we need to be brave enough in this community to actually talk about an anti-racist policy. There's going to be a lot of communication that's needed. There's going to be a lot of conversations within the community about what that means. There are schools that have had this anti-racist policy for a decade, and Natick has not, it's not even in our strategic plan yet. I'm not someone of color, but if I am somebody who is trying to put myself in their shoes, I would want to be sure that the people that were there in the leadership positions were ready to welcome me in real ways. And I think that type of policy would actually signal to teachers of color that we're going to follow through on it.
Thank you, Catherine. So next we'll ask Shai. Shai, what policies would you implement to attract faculty and staff of color to Natick Public Schools and to retain those staff members?
Yeah, so it's been said before, and I'll say it again. I think it's important to inform everything that we do by data, by information. Data is anything we collect. When it comes specifically to understanding how we recruit and retain educators of color, we have some data already from exit interviews. We know that teachers of color are leaving Natick, their jobs faster than their counterparts who are white. In fact, you all, R.I.S.E, brought that up to my attention. And I went to the superintendent and I asked her those questions. And she provided me with some data around exit interviews, as well as the information that they got from people, educators of color who they've offered jobs to and chose other jobs in other districts to better understand why is it that teachers of color are not coming here to Natick. And here's the things that we've heard of. First, there aren't that many colleagues of color. So when they come into the teacher lounge, there's not that many people who look like them who they can relate to. Number two, we have a problem with our teacher salaries. We need to increase our teacher salaries to be more competitive. Number three, we have to diversify our community because people of color don't live in this, not that many people of color live in this community. We have to bring people, make housing more affordable and bring people to our community because it's also hard to travel to Natick if you're living in other areas. So we need to look at those specific issues and figure out, number one, how do we make more of a concerted effort to increase salaries in order to bring the best educators out there, including educators of color. Number two, there's actually a whole municipality effort called REMAP to figure out how do we make our housing more equitable and more affordable, and how do we make transportation from people from the outside to come to Natick so that we can attract more talent, including people of color from the city into Natick. That will help teachers come to our community. And third, we need to make sure that we're, by hiring more people of color, we'll create a community of educators who can work with each other and feel supported by each other. So those are kind of three data-driven specific policy recommendations that we should pursue.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Matt, what policies would you implement to attract faculty and staff of color to Natick Public Schools and to retain those staff members?
It's a great question and a difficult one, and it's a big, broad problem. And I agree with Dr. Fuchsman. I think one of the key things that we can do is to constantly work to get higher salaries for our teachers and for our educators. That is an attractor for a lot of people, and that's an important thing to do. I'm the chair of the policy review subcommittee. We have just recently started working on a new microaggression policy, and this is the first step in what will be multiple steps having to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those things. It is we should have done it before. It's long time coming, and I'm glad to be working on it now. I think it's important for us as a community to model the behavior that we want to see. So I think as somebody we are as a district that's trying to attract talent, we want to show them that we care, that we are not just talking about anti-racism, that we are taking those, like we talked about at the beginning, we are taking steps to make our district better, to make it more inclusive, to make it more attractive. Now, it's important for us to communicate about the things that we're doing in terms of curriculum. And it's to make sure that we show people that we're doing things more diversely. We are showing more viewpoints. We are showing people that it is that we have all kinds of different things that we're teaching our students, that they are learning about all different angles, not just traditional things that they might have seen before. So I think we combine all of that work. I look forward to finishing the microaggression policy over time and then moving on to the next set of policies that are related, that are under this umbrella. That policy will require a lot of community work and community input, and eventually we will bring that to the full school committee and we will institute that policy. I think it's a huge step, and I look forward to finishing it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. So I do want to note for this next question, it comes from a community member, Al Martinez, who is a recent NHS graduate. So I will be asking this to Shai first. Shai, what are your thoughts on expanding the METCO program?
2 other grades. I'm assuming that's, so right now we accept them beginning middle school. So we had a challenge as a district for a long time, which was that we had this growing enrollment of preschool and kindergarten, those early grade students. We had this bubble of young students who are coming. That bubble is now moving into middle school and high school. So we have this big enrollment at those middle school and high school grades, but our enrollment in kindergarten is decreasing over time. And so that gives us a new opportunity now. And so that was the reason why we couldn't do that in METCO before, is because we just didn't have space in those early grades. Now we have that space. Now it's time to have that conversation. Now we can bring METCO students from early grades through 12th grade because we have that space. And I absolutely support it. I think with the METCO program, there's more to this, to making sure that they're not only we're enrolling them, but that we're supporting them. There's research out there about the experience, first of all, of Black and brown students in predominantly white schools, about their mental health, about academic, the achievement gap, which is not about, people talk about achievement gap as if there's something about being Black and brown that makes you not do well in school. If you're Black and you're not doing well in school, it's not because you're Black, it's because you're going to a school that has racist structures. We need to figure out what are those structures, what are those drivers that make our school more welcoming to students of color. With METCO, there's another added issue of them being transported from far away and from communities outside, as opposed to coming from Natick. We need to make sure that we're supporting them. We need to make sure that we're looking at what are their needs and supporting them, so they're not only coming to Natick, but they're coming in, they're successful in our schools, starting in kindergarten.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Matt, what are your thoughts on expanding the METCO program?
So the short answer is I would love to expand it. There's no question. I think it's a wonderful program. And the more students who we can bring to Natick, that's wonderful. Like Dr. Frugsman said, we have a logistics problem that we have to deal with from time to time with enrollment. The people who live in Natick have the opportunity to go to public school in Natick. So as enrollment opens in certain areas, we can add more students. I think it's a wonderful experience. But also, like Dr. Frugsman said, we are making a commitment to these students from the moment they join us all the way through school. So we have to be prepared to support those students and guide them through their entire journey. It is more of a logistics problem and challenge than anything else. I don't think there would be, certainly not for me, any resistance to having a broader spectrum, a larger community of METCO students joining us. I think we just have to figure out where are the right opportunities in terms of student population. It's a really challenging problem because we have, as you know, in Natick, we have lots of new housing developments. We have lots of new people moving to town. We don't know exactly, it's hard to predict multiple years in the future where those bubbles are going to be, but we do know that when we add students there, we don't get to start a student in kindergarten and then 3 years later decide we don't have room. So we are making a long-term commitment, which I think is wonderful for all of our students, not just the METCO student, and we should be prepared to and plan for that whole journey. So fully supportive, would love to figure out a way to get more students. We just have to figure out how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Matt. So next, Catherine, what are your thoughts on expanding the METCO program?
I have to say that my opinion on this has actually changed in I would say the last 3 or 4 years. And it's mostly this year, I will say, because when I started hearing us wanting to expand from K to 4 or K to 5, at first I was excited about that. And then I started to think about the reality of it. And I'll share that when I taught in Boston, I taught at a Metco school. So it received Metco students. It was a charter school. So it's funny that it was in Boston, but it was still a Metco program. And I witnessed firsthand the students who were traveling longer in my classroom, second grade. They had longer days, even when they were coming to the school because of where it was in Boston. And that gives me pause, knowing that students would be traveling all the way to Natick. But most importantly, I don't want to think about the Metco program as whether or not it's convenient to us or not, whether or not we have the logistical ability to offer it. I want to talk about the human piece of it. And when I attended the Natick is United, it was a Natick is United forum one night this February. I heard a speaker talk about his students' experience or his children's experience who were Black in Natick, and their friends who were in the Metco program, some of their friends in the Metco program who had a very different experience in Natick, whether or not because they were in the Metco program. And I thought that was fascinating, that we are inviting students into our schools, and yet we know that they are having a different experience than a student who is a resident here in Natick, and also students of color that are residents. So before we expand this program, I think we need to do a really deep dive into student experience and understand what our responsibility is to respond to the student experience of the students who are currently in the program.
Thank you, Catherine. So our next question will go to Matt first. Matt, what steps would you take to create a safe environment for students of color?
So another good question. I won't go through the whole microaggression policy discussion that I spoke about before, but I will mention that policies like that are really critical. This is to have in place. That policy will give guidelines to staff, teachers, families, and students about how they're supposed to handle microaggressions. Not only that, but having that allows people to know that we care, right? It's important that all students feel that they are safe and that they feel like they can be themselves and that they feel like they can be heard. They need to be able to feel safe communicating. And the policies that we put in place, along with the curriculum that we teach and the programs, the extracurricular types of things, the services that we provide, all are intended to make all of our students feel welcome and feel safe. And one of the things that I've been researching, and I am learning as we go as well. I'm not an expert in this field, and so I fully acknowledge that there's lots to learn every day. We're learning new things. But one of the things that I think is important for us to look at, and I've been doing some research about homework and the impact of homework and how different students have different abilities to receive help when they're doing their homework, right? And so when you have students who have pressure or feel pressure that that homework counts so much, I'm not saying get rid of homework, certainly, but the impact that homework has in grading, right, is really, really important to weigh that we don't all have equitable opportunity to do that homework. We want to make sure that people, when they come to school, don't feel pressure, that everybody has an equal opportunity to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So next, Catherine, what steps would you take to create a safe environment for students of color?
Sorry, I'm forgetting I have to unmute myself. I love the question because I love that it tailors back to this idea of belonging, and that it goes back to the students. And we talk about student achievement a lot as that being the goal for the school committee, right? To say, like, how can we get all of our students to achieve? And that does go back to your question that all students then need to feel safe. And I attended the National School Board Association's Summit on Equity, and I love the speakers. His whole reference was love first, teach second. So I think we have that in our goal number 2 in the strategic plan of the social and emotional needs of our students and addressing those. But I think we need to look at those again with disaggregated data. And we need to listen to our students who are not white and to say, what has your experience been? And do that in quantifiable ways, you know, using our school counselors, using surveys for families, understanding what their experience is like in schools, being brave enough to dig into it in a public way, and then as an anti-racist school, hopefully acknowledging it, challenging it, and changing it for those students if there is in fact experiential issues that we need to deal with. And I do think that there are. So that, you know, that idea of listening and understanding student experience, and then also just making sure that we are always grounded in the fact that we are about people and we are about students, students' full development. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Catherine. So next, Shai, what steps would you take to create a safe environment for students of color?
So this question speaks directly to my professional experience. So I hadn't mentioned in my introduction, I have a doctorate in education and over 20 years of experience conducting research to improve education practice and policy. And one of the areas that I've been focusing on has been, how do we improve the lives of students and inclusion of students who are different or who are diverse. I've written a paper about what is it that about substance misuse among transgender versus cisgender students, and understanding what is the environment that creates mental health issues among LGBTQ students. I've written a paper about cyberbullying among youth with disabilities. I've conducted trainings about how do we reduce substance misuse among Latino students in Spanish. This is the work that I do. I research these practices, I research these issues, and I figure out solutions. And I can tell you what are the common strategies, whether we're talking about LGBTQ students, whether we're talking about Black and Brown students, whether we're talking about students with disabilities. We need to change the environment. We need to educate every student about what does inclusion mean. We need to make sure that every student develops the social and emotional skills, things like social awareness, understanding differences, celebrating differences, knowing how to interact with each other, how to create inclusive environments. Those are skills we need to teach all of our students. The problem with the way we've been doing up until now historically is that we focus on the students who are struggling, the students who are excluded. We're not focusing on what is it that we need to change among the students who are in the center, so that we create a more inclusive society, more inclusive students, more inclusive environment by teaching students those skills. So we need to work with all students, and that includes things like working on empowering bystanders. Oftentimes with microaggressions or acts of racism, there's a victim, there's a perpetrator. Most of the other students are bystanders, and most students choose to be passive bystanders. So one of the effective strategies, evidence-based strategies, is teaching students what does it mean to be an active bystander, so that if you see a microaggression, if you see of an act of racism, you speak up so that you change the environment so that it's no longer acceptable to discriminate.
Thank you, Shai. So it looks like we will have time for one more question before we do our closing statements. So this next question we'll be asking Catherine first. And I also want to note this question is also coming from a member of our community, El Martinez. And their question is, have you spoken to current or former students of color about their experience in our schools?
Yes, I have. It's important work to me. It's important just to be a relational person in any leadership role, but just as a person that's living in this community. If it's not clear yet, I'm not from here. I'm from the Midwest. I'm an extrovert. I'm going to talk to anybody and everybody that I can. I also think as a leader, we have to seek out those relationships, and we have to pursue people who are not immediately in our immediate circles. And so we have to reach out to people who are different from us, whether it's religious, political, racial, language, all of those things. That makes us that makes me better informed. So I absolutely do reach out to students. At Johnson, where my kids go, there's a diverse group of students there. We often would stay and play on the playground for hours. And as a community playground, that's where those conversations would happen. I'm a big fan of that kind of informal conversation. And then in my role as a town meeting member, and also as somebody who is seeking this election, I've sought out leaders in our town of color, and I've asked them their opinion. Before I've given answers, I've said, hey, how does this look to you? Can you help me understand what I'm not seeing here? So it's absolutely important to me to continue to build those relationships and just always wonder myself, what is it that I'm not seeing, and what might somebody else be seeing, and how could I be better informed by understanding their experience more?
Great, thank you, Catherine. So next, Shai, have you spoken to current or former students of color about their experience in our schools?
So I've had multiple conversations, both with students, former students, and with parents who of different backgrounds. I've spoken to Black students. I've spoken to families, Spanish-speaking families. I had actually one of my virtual coffees in Spanish with multiple families who are Hispanic or Spanish-speaking families. I've spoken to multiple members of the Indian community in Natick, which is a growing community, to better understand the experience. And honestly, I've had a really hard time hearing some of the stories that I've heard. Some students are really struggling, and they're struggling not because of who they are, but because of the discrimination experienced by their peers. I heard from one parent that a child as young as kindergarten came home crying because of something that a comment made by another student. And at kindergarten, I'm assuming, that age, I'm assuming that the other student just didn't know better. But one of the reflection of that mother was that this teacher didn't do anything. The teacher heard it and didn't do anything. And so we need to do a better job of, from the experience I'm hearing, we need to train our teachers around issues of microaggressions, around issues of racism. Again, how do you empower bystanders? How do you work with when this situation comes up, when the moment, the teaching moment comes up? How do you use that? Not to castigate the kindergartner who just made an offensive comment, but how do you teach the kindergartner why what they said was wrong? Again, to build those skills. So I definitely think we have a long way to go. I also must say the question was put by El Martinez, who posted their experience on Facebook, and I read a lot of what they said. And a lot of what other people said to that thread, which I think, by the way, was very courageous. So I've been reading, I've been talking, and I've been really trying to understand better the experiences of our diverse students.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Matt, have you spoken to current or former students of color about their experiences in the schools?
Yes, over the years, certainly. And that's something that will continue. And is important part. It's important for us as school committee members to be collecting feedback and hearing about experiences from everybody all the time. And the reality is I live a privileged life, of course, and I have my perspective, but I also, and I learn through my daughter's eyes and through other members of my family and friends. The more information that I can collect, the better I can do. This is bigger than just being a member of the school committee, right? The more information I learn, the more perspectives I collect, the better person I will be. That is my ultimate goal. Whatever happens in this election or anything like that, my primary job is to be a good role model, a good father for my children. And it's important for me personally to always be bettering myself. So whether it's talking to my daughter's friends when they've been over the house, or when I see people walking around town, or when I run into families, or when I hear during the normal course of school committee business, when I get to talk to people, I am always, my whole life, I'm always learning from everybody around me. And that, I think, is a huge step towards making people, this goes back to what I had said before about people needing to feel like they're heard, right? Not only does it serve me to learn and to become a better person, but I believe it makes people feel better when they know that there's somebody listening, not just dismissing what they said, and we can all grow together if we all listen to each other. And certainly my experiences have been mine, and I never dismiss what other people's experiences are. And so the more I can learn, the better not only I will be as a person, but the better I can serve the community.
Thank you, Matt. So now it's time to get into our closing statements. As a reminder, the closing statements will be 1 minute long. So we will start with Shai. Shai, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you so much again to all of you for being part of this important conversation, especially to R.I.S.E, to the participants of the group and the advisors for bringing this conversation, because I know this is the first event that you had, or last night was, this their second big event, and it's such an important conversation to have. I'm running for school committee re-election because education is what I've chosen to do as a career. Back when I was in college, I chose to go into the field of education. 22 years later, I'm still working this field. This is my calling. I want to improve education for all students. And I work with districts across the country and state agencies across the country. And one of the reasons I love my job is because I get to learn to not only provide my expertise to districts across the country, but I get to learn about best practices, including on issues of anti-racism and issues of equity. I've worked with many directors of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm looking forward to bringing everything that I'm learning from across the country to improve our schools right here in Natick. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. Next, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you to everyone that stayed with us. I know that we are all zoomed out, but I'm grateful for this opportunity, especially to have this conversation about such an important topic. For me, being a candidate on the school committee right now is coming full circle. Not only am I a mom of 5 kids in this district from first grade until sophomore year in high school, I also was an elementary school teacher, and I started that teaching in Chicago with a class that was 100% African American. That is where I learned and where I was privileged enough to understand that equity and anti-racism matters now, and it's an urgent problem in our country. And in Natick, we know that our children, 76%, we're a 76% district that's white, but we will have students that are going to go on into the rest of the world and will be leaders and need to have that anti-racism. And we have students now who are experiencing racism. And so we need to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Next, Matt.
Thank you again for having us, and thank you to Shai and Catherine, of course, for participating in another forum altogether. Like I said before, the world that my daughters are growing up in, that all of our students are growing up in, it's our responsibility to provide an environment for them where they can thrive and be the best people that they can be. It is our responsibility to fill the buckets of the people around us, if you've seen that book, to be a bucket filler. I take it as my responsibility to do everything that I can every day, to learn something new, to take more action, to make the world better for my kids and for my environment, so that when they grow up, and not to pump you all up, the young students and recent graduates, but that they grow up and they become more like you. It's an inspiration to see that this is what happens when you go through the Natick Public Schools. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Matt. I will turn it over to Connor to wrap this up.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment. First, I want to thank the candidates for joining us tonight. The fact that all 3 of you agreed to do this and show up and answer our questions without knowing what they were going to be ahead of time. We really appreciate that. This is a really important conversation, not only just to the young people, but to our entire community. And so I want to give a shout out to that community for showing up tonight. We were really pleasantly surprised by the registrations that we had. So we want to thank everyone that tuned in and stayed with us through this entire conversation. And I just want to give a special shout out to the rest of the R.I.S.E team, including our advisors. We are just beginning, and this was such an exciting opportunity to have with all of you. So with that, we are just a few minutes before 8. So I want to wish everyone a great evening, stay safe, and take care, everyone.